Hey folks, so in 632 BCE, a lunatic who won the Olympic Games tried to launch a violent coup in Athens. It failed, so problem over for the city, right? Wrong. The fact that somebody had come so close to overthrowing the government at all was deeply worrying for the Athenians. A lot of their neighbours were undergoing regime change, falling under the control of tyrants. By the way, the Greeks use the word tyrant differently to us. When we say the word, it carries a couple of negative connotations. Being called a tyrant in the 21st century is not a compliment. 2,500 years ago in Greece, however, it was more of a neutral term. A tyrant referred to somebody who ruled illegitimately, having come to power through unconstitutional means, and who then ruled despotically outside the official institutions of power. The trouble was the first generation of Greek tyrants are generally rather popular. Although all of them had a few skeletons in their closet, they often left their cities better off than how they found them. The Athenians, whose system of government and society was much more archaic and outdated than many other cities, were especially at risk of this. The established order in Athens may have defeated one coup, but that does not mean that they were safe from another potential tyrant. So what was the Athenian establishment? Well, in 7th century Athens there was no establishment. The man with total and absolute power was really several men from a small ring of competing aristocratic families. This is what they call an oligarchy. It's a historically chaotic form of government, which the Athenians had morphed into an especially unstable and unsustainable brand. They tried to write an official law code, but it hadn't done great, and clearly wasn't working effectively for everyone. Basically, all the power of judgment and political decision-making lay in the hands of these few rich families. The only trouble was there was no written law code, so whenever they acted as judges, they more or less settled everything with a who can pay the biggest bribe competition. Technically, this wasn't illegal either, because, like I said, that's the beauty of not having written down laws. Regarding political decision-making, they would elect themselves to these positions as shown from the image I'm reusing from last episode. You've got the Archon Basileus, he doesn't do much, he's mostly just in it for the festivals. Then you've got the Archon Polemarch, he's commander-in-chief of the army. And then you have the eponymous Archon, he's the one doing all the heavy lifting around here. Whenever they disagree on anything, they would fall back on an ancient conflict resolution tradition. They would kill each other, like straight-up political violence. After all, when there are no written laws, what happens when the judges start arguing? When they weren't fighting each other, the aristocrats were facing one of the greatest disasters in the city's history. The population of Attica had exploded, and corrupt judges had distributed inherited lands unevenly, according to those who had bribed them the most. As a result, those who started off poor were becoming so destitute that they couldn't support their families. Those who found themselves in this situation were forced to sell their land to larger landlords, and then be forced to pay a sixth of its product as rent. Note that if the land had not been able to support a family before, it definitely wasn't going to be able to now, but 1/6 of what it produced was needed for rent. This kept them tied to the land as labourers for the wealthy, kind of like medieval serfdom. And if you found yourself still starving to death, your local noble had an easy solution for you. Just sell yourself and your family into slavery, either to your local aristocrat, who will use you to work the same land that you once owned, only for no pay so you'll never be able to buy it back, or into a foreign slave market, where you would probably be forever separated from your family and sent to an unpleasant life in an unfamiliar land. Maybe you'll end up dying in the mines of Cyprus, or as a sex slave in Egypt. You might even get to be a eunuch in some satrap's court. Who cares? Certainly not these business minds. Enter Solon. This is Solon. Solon doesn't know it yet, but he's going to be one of the 7 sages of ancient Greece one day. For the moment, though, he's just Solon. Born of a noble, if not super rich family, bit of a war hero, generally good guy, trusted by all, elected to the Big Boy archonship in 594 BCE. Solon knew that his city was in trouble. The rich were pestering him to find a way to shut the poor up, and their incessant whining was getting a bit much, and that coup of Cylon a few decades earlier had gotten everyone jumpy about a revolution. The poor were in his ear 24/7 about the injustices of selling their own children into slavery and their lack of political rights, or any rights for that matter, and the rampantly corrupt legal system, and the monopolization of all the good land by the rich so that they can practically enslave everybody. Solon knew that he'd have to find a compromise between the two sides quickly, or there'd be violence, so he put on his thinking hat and came up with a solution. He declared first of all that he was cancelling all outstanding debts, basically breaking the hold the rich had over the poor and preventing anyone else from being sold into slavery. He also removed all of the stones representing mortgaged land, essentially destroying the hectomoroi as a class. The rich, including himself, would just have to take the loss, and the poor would be free from bondage. They remember this event as the shaking off of the burdens. He refused any calls for land or wealth redistribution, however, feeling it was best to let the rich keep their fortunes as long as they promised to use them for good. He reformed the legal system and introduced a new law allowing people to prosecute on behalf of somebody else. Previously, only the injured party could bring a case to court, but Solon charged that some crimes were against the public good, and therefore the public should be able to prosecute. He also combated the rampant legal corruption that had caused so many of these problems Athens was now facing, by making the first appeal court, although no one's sure fully how it worked, or how effective it really was. Point is that it's a step in the right direction. He also boosted the Athenian economy by inviting skilled immigrants in to try and kickstart some industries that weren't purely agriculturally based, like a trade in olive oil and pottery, literally the two most Greek things ever, forcing Athens to conform with the Corinthian weights and measures standards to make trade with Athens more appealing to the Corinthian-dominated market of the time. He ended by creating a constitution, the first real one Athens would ever have. It's not quite democracy yet, rather democracy's fairly old-fashioned grandfather called timocracy. Basically, political participation was opened up to all, but the degree to which you could participate in politics was limited according to wealth and property. Solon started by dividing political responsibility between 4 bodies. The magistrates, which were the same as before, 9 archons, 3 of which are important. The Council of Areopagus, this already existed as well. It was just a club of ex-archons, basically. Once someone finished their term of office, they would join the council, and basically act like the highest court in the land. The Boule, or Council of 400, this was new, and acted as a counterbalance to the Areopagus. It would also decide what would be debated that day by the assembly, or the ecclesia. This was the most radical change, although an assembly of citizens had probably existed beforehand. It was almost certainly an infrequent occurrence, under the tight control of the aristocrats. Now the right to attend the assembly and discuss matters of politics was guaranteed to all free men. And I do mean men. Now that Athenian politics had been made more complicated, Solon went about defining who was allowed to participate in what, which is going to make it super complicated. So pay attention, because here's where it gets wild. Solon divided society into 4 castes according to wealth. He measured wealth according to how many bushels of wheat or equivalent value thereof one could produce on an annual basis. If your estate provided 500 bushels of wheat or more, congratulations. You're a pentakosio medimimnoia. Fucking hell. This makes you the super rich, and you're qualified for basically any position you want. This gives you exclusive rights to be guardian of the treasury of Athena, probably because of the immense personal fortune, which is hopefully going to prevent any temptation to get corrupt whilst handling the state's money. If your estate produces over 300 bushels, but not quite 500, you're part of the hippies class. This often translates to knight, as this was the class rich enough to be able to maintain and train a horse. As a result, they often served as cavalry in the city's wars. In politics from now on, however, hippies are eligible for the archonship, and therefore eventual admittance to the Council of Areopagus. If you can't quite make hippie status, but you still have an estate worth 200 bushels or more, then welcome to the Zugatai. Typically as a Zugatai, you can't afford a warhorse, but are used to serving your state as a hoplite, decked out in some pretty pricey gear. You get to hold minor political office, and you can also access membership to the Boule, even if the Areopagus is still a little bit out of reach. However, you've at least managed to avoid being a theet. Theets are the lowest class in Athens, as they have less than 200 bushels growing on their land per year, but are mostly just the super poor, otherwise known as a huge portion of the population. Most of these guys can't even buy all the proper hoplite gear, and just have to be given stones to throw at the enemy. They can access the assembly and join in debates, but they can't hold political office and generally aren't taken very seriously. This may seem staggeringly unfair to us, but note that if a theet managed to produce more than 200 bushels a year, he would move up in the class system. Likewise, a destitute pentakosio would find himself in the theet class. Social mobility according to wealth is new. Beforehand it was dictated according to blood and ancestry. So everyone was happy, right? No, obviously everyone was furious with Solon. The already powerful had wanted him to write a constitution that set in stone everything the way it was, and felt betrayed that Solon, an aristocrat himself, would weaken the position of the nobility. The people, on the other hand, had wanted a full-blown revolution, land and wealth redistribution, etc. Although their debts had been cancelled, they still had the worst land and not much of it. The predatory lending of the rich had been stopped, but the underlying problem of massive wealth inequality still loomed. Solon was naturally really annoyed at this as he wrote loads of poetry about how frustrating it was. Oh yeah, in case you need another reason to love this guy besides founding the basis of many of our modern systems of government, he was also super into poetry, which is, sweet. He eventually got so tired of politics that he left Athens and went travelling to newer and bigger adventures. This is the end of Solon in regards to the story of Athens, but the man is just getting started establishing himself as a legend. But before he left, he invited back all the political exiles Athens had expelled over the last few decades, including the ones expelled for killing Cylon's supporters. This was quite a smart move, as it brought in powerful and influential figures in Athens, all of which owed a debt directly to Solon and his reforms. After all, he was the reason they were allowed home, and hopefully they'd prop up the new system. And so Solon left Athens for 10 years, allowing a decade to basically mean his reforms would act like an experiment, and it would have mixed success, as we'll see in next time.